Good
evening and welcome to this very, very special conversation. It's a special day today, and I'll tell you a story as to why this day is special. It's something that each of us as Indian citizens must know. Unfortunately, given the way the media is right now, we don't talk about the important things, which is why we've carved out this time to talk about something that's really important and that affects every one of our lives, which is why we should pay attention. So let me first begin with telling you a story. There was once a police officer called Prakash Singh. Now, Prakash Singh was the DGP of the police, which is the Director General of Police, at the highest rank that he could reach. He headed the Border Security Force, he headed Uttar Pradesh Police, Assam Police, and he was quite fabulous. And then back in 1996, after he retired, he took all of the learnings that he had from his career in the police and decided that reform in how the police is functioning is really important. Now, remember, for the last several weeks, we've been talking about how there are problems with our policing system and there has to be reform in that policing system, right? So back in 1996, Prakash Singh, who had retired as DGP, approached the Supreme Court with a public interest litigation, bringing out all of the problems that were facing the police at that point, asking the Supreme Court to intervene and give specific directions to government to actually reform the police. Because remember how we talked about no government would willingly want to reform the police, because every government wants to use the police as a personal weapon against their political enemies and to further their own political causes. So how to get this done? Let's go to the Supreme Court. Now, this happened in 1996. The judgment came in 2006 on the 22nd of September. If you've got your calendars out and you're working from home, you should know that today is the 26th of September. And it's that same anniversary 14 years later. So what did the Supreme Court tell us back on the 22nd of September in 2006? The Supreme Court passed a historic judgment in a case that you might have heard about. It's called Prakash Singh and others versus the Union of India. And the Supreme Court instructed central governments and state governments to change, to bring in reform and to bring in a certain functional autonomy of the police, which means that basically separate the politics from the police and allow the police to function without the influence of politicians. And it was not just that. It was a very elaborate, very beautiful judgment that actually listed out what needed to be done and how it needed to be done. And it was assumed then it was a massive victory, and this would happen because it was an instruction from the Supreme Court. Now, let me take you through what that instruction was. Now, remember, over the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the lack of accountability, problems with criminal investigation, problems with poor infrastructure and poor human resource management of police, the problems with the fact that the police is not really public or citizen friendly, and they're being overly controlled by politicians who can transfer them at will. Here's what the Supreme Court said, and we're going to put up a little presentation so you can see these main points that the Supreme Court gave us back in 2006 in this landmark judgment. Now, the first thing that the Supreme Court said was basically that the government would have to, and this is point number one, directive number one, constitute a state security commission. Now, what does this commission do? It ensures that state government does not exercise unwarranted influence on the police. 2, it lays down broad policy guidelines. And 3, it evaluates the performance of the state police. And this sounds fantastic. So that was directive number 1. Directive number 2, to ensure that the DGP is appointed through a merit-based, transparent process and gets a minimum tenure of 2 years, which means he cannot be transferred once he has been appointed. So if there is a politician who's not happy with him, they can't move him out, they can't do his job for at least 2 years. Directive number 3 is that other officers, superintendents of police and districts and station house officers who are in charge of individual police stations, are also given a minimum tenure of 2 years, which means they can't be transferred out as well. Directive number 4 is that separate investigation and law and order functions of the police. So those who stand on bandobast and those who investigate actually be 2 separate teams of people, and they're not interchangeable. And human resources wise and talent and training wise, this would have made a huge difference. Directive number 5, to set up a police establishment board, which will decide transfers, postings, promotions, and other matters based on merit. anything above the rank of Deputy Superintendent of Police. And Directive number 6, a police complaints authority where citizens like you and me can go ahead and complain if there are problems like misconduct, custodial death, grievous hurt, rape in police custodies, all of these things, that there would be a police complaints authority which would actually go and collect those complaints. Unfortunately, 14 years down the line, very little of this has actually changed, because you know that in the conversations that we've had over the last couple of weeks, we've realized that these problems still exist. So what happened in the last 14 years? How have we not managed to actually follow the directives of the Supreme Court? Is there a higher authority to give directives to our governments that they will listen? We're going to have that conversation to figure out, now that we've already had the Bible on what needs to be done for the last 14 years, why hasn't it been done? Now, to answer these questions, I have none other than that fantastic police officer, Mr. Prakash Singh, who joins us right now. Also, along with him, we have Maja Daruwala, who is a senior advisor at the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, focusing on access to justice programs. So she focuses, over the last 40 years, she's worked in human rights, and she focuses on police reform, prison reform, right to information, legal empowerment, women's rights, rights of expression, and human rights and advocacy. It is a brilliant team of people to have this conversation with. We'll also take questions from you. So please join and ask us your questions. Let me first then go to Mr. Prakash Singh. Mr. Singh, thank you for joining us on this very important day. Because after that, you also went, you started the Indian Police Foundation, which was to put pressure on governments in order to implement the Supreme Court judgment. Did you, back in 2006, think you would have to put pressure to implement a Supreme Court judgment?
No, there is no question of putting pressure on the state government. In fact, the Supreme Court itself, they decided to monitor the implementation of their jurisdictions. So my job was limited to assisting the Supreme Court every time there was a hearing as to what has been the progress so far and what further needs to be done. And the Indian Police Foundation was also not set up to put any kind of pressure on the government. In fact, it was put up as some kind of an independent think tank to deliberate on police matters and suggest such changes as would improve the functioning of the police in different areas. So, I mean, there is no question of putting pressure on the police department, on the government, either individually or through the police foundation. The Supreme Court itself was monitoring the implementation of the judgment, and since at one stage the government was, the Supreme Court was somewhat in two minds what to do in the case, because we were repeatedly saying that the states are not complying, and they were not sure whether we are projecting the right picture before them. So in 2008, they appointed a Justice Thomas committee. Headed by Justice Thomas, and then there were two other members, one serving IAS officer and a retired IPS officer. Now, this committee deliberated over a period of 2 years, and at the end of it, they came to the conclusion, I just quote their words, they expressed their sense of dismay, that is the word they used, over the, again, total indifference of the states to the implementation of Supreme Court's directions. That was the finding of the Justice Thomas Committee in 2010. Now, this finding was also submitted to the Supreme Court. Now, the problem that we are facing is that there are some judges who are very committed to police reforms. There are some judges who are not so committed, and they take a different attitude. And for the last 14 years, it has been, the implementation has been monitored, and not that there has been no progress, mind you. Under the watchful eyes of the Supreme Court, the states are, at least on paper, they are trying to show that, yes, we are on the right side of the Supreme Court and that we have done something to implement your directions. Now, as far as the states are concerned, you could broadly classify them in two categories: states which have passed acts and states which have passed executive orders. Now, let me tell you that the Supreme Court judgment contained some sentences like this, that these orders will hold good till such time as the state and the center issue their own. Just a minute. Till such time as the center and the state pass their own legislation on the subject. There was this kind of mandatory insertion in the Supreme Court directions. I say it mandatory because the Supreme Court can give directions if there is a legislative vacuum, but they cannot legislate. And therefore, they said that these directions are being given, but these directions will hold good only till such time as the states and the center pass their own laws on the subject. Now, some states were very clever. They saw in this caveat an escape clause. They said that if we pass acts, then we are outside the purview and outside beyond the monitoring of the Supreme Court. So several states started passing acts. And I need hardly tell you, Bihar was the first state to pass an act, and it was the most regressive piece of legislation. And most of the states which have passed acts, the acts were designed to give, shall I say, legal cover to the existing arrangements. Nothing more than that. It was not in compliance with the Supreme Court's directions, but it was to circumvent the implementation of Supreme Court's directions. So in this category come 17 states which have passed acts, and the constitutionality of these acts has been challenged by Mr. Harish Salve through a writ petition that is still pending before the Supreme Court. Then the remaining 12 states, they have passed executive orders. Now, Justice Thomas Committee examined these the executive orders, and they came to the conclusion that none of the states have complied with the letter and spirit of court's directions. So that is how it has been. And at the end of 14 years, we find that the states which have passed acts or the states which have passed executive orders, none of them have sincerely, in a bona fide manner, tried to comply with the Supreme Court's directions. That is the status today. Shall I continue, or you would like to?
So, quick question for you, sir. That none of the states you say have followed the Supreme Court direction. What hope is there now? What is the next step of action? How do we still bring about these changes?
Yes. So your question is, how do we move from here? What is the way forward?
Yes.
You see, there are several avenues which are open to us. One, of course, we sustain the pressure in the Supreme Court. That we don't have to give up. That is an area where the Supreme Court has been giving us a hearing, and if perchance we get a good justice who is committed to police reforms, things really move forward. So, I mean, we are still hopeful that Supreme Court may be able to produce results and may be able to nudge the states forward. So one is that the pressure in the Supreme Court is maintained. A second strategy which I've been suggesting to people in the states, that this battle should be decentralized. In every high court, there should be a writ petition that this particular that the state government of, say, Andhra Pradesh has not complied with the provisions of the Supreme Court directions, and there is non-compliance because of the ABCD, these matters. And let the High Court deal with that matter. So if the battle is decentralized, then it is possible that some high courts would take interest in the matter, and they would also prevail upon the state governments and put pressure on the state governments to move forward. That is two. Thirdly, you see, ultimately, I have been telling my colleagues, the officers in the department, that we should create an environment where people become favorable to the idea of police reforms, and they start articulating their demands for police reforms very forcefully. Now, how is that possible? See, for that, I have been repeatedly sort of emphasizing that we need to carry out such internal reforms within the department itself, which do not require any legislative sanction, which would not require any financial allotment from the state government, and to which no politician would be opposed. Let us bring about such transformation within the department. Your next question could be, what would be such changes? You see, changes would be, say, the ambience at the police station. Today, when a complainant enters a police station, his mind is full of misgivings and apprehensions, whether my report will be registered or not registered, how much time I'll have to spend here, whether Darogaji will be kind to me or he'll use foul language, all kinds of misgivings and apprehensions he has. You create an ambience where he feels where he has the same kind of feeling when he enters a hospital. When you enter a hospital, you know that the doctor is going to treat you. I mean, he may be successful in treatment, he may not be successful in treatment, but you are hopeful that he is going to treat you, and it may lead to, your pain being alleviated, your suffering becoming less. So that kind of feeling, we should be able to generate that feeling, that friendly feeling, the feeling of a people-friendly police, that you are entering a police station. Here, your grievances would be redressed, and the best possible effort would be made to, whatever is to be done, to recover a property, to recover your car, or to recover your daughter who has run away, or recover your property which has been stolen, etc., etc. One should get that feeling. Now, it requires an attitudinal change on the part of police. It does not require any financial allotment. It doesn't require any law on the subject. Let us create that environment in a police station. And secondly, let the report be
And
registered.
a quick
What is
question to you before I bring in Ms. Daruwala. So that would actually depend on the administration of the police, right? The commissioners, the actual IPS to change the attitude within their own forces. What is that waiting for? Why hasn't that happened up till now?
You're asking me or the Maja Daruwala?
Yes. No, I'm asking you, and then I'll bring in Ms. Daruwala for my next question.
No, there's nothing to prevent. I said it's just a question of attitudinal change, better training, sensitizing the police personnel that this is how you need to behave, that there should be a proper reception, and there should be an officer who should receive any visitor to a police station, listen to him or her with sympathy, with compassion, with empathy, and then having listened to him, then take him to the officer who registers FIR or registers complaints, depending upon whether it's a cognizable case or non-cognizable case. So that kind of environment, it only requires an attitudinal change. Unfortunately, it has not happened because of a number of reasons. Number one, we are very short of resources. Police buildings, if you go and see, they are in a pathetic state. The question of there's no provision of a visitor's room. Maybe there are inadequate number of chairs. Maybe there is no officer who could be designated as an officer to receive and talk to a complainant. So the infrastructure is so poor and so pathetic that even if you want to, probably you will have to either spend your own money or ask the mohalla people to contribute, which is do something like this so that we can at least receive the visitors. So in terms of financially, we are very badly off. The infrastructure is very poor, and somehow it has been going on. But this needs to improve, and gradually it is improving. And some states have created what they call model police stations, which are, I saw there are two such in Rajasthan. They are really good police stations where you get a different feeling altogether when you enter the police station. But this kind of thing has to spread. And on a larger scale, this example has to be followed, that you have a good police station building where there's a reception room, where there's an officer designated. So all this requires more funding and more manpower also. And it's a very slow process, but it has started happening. That's all I can say.
Right, let me also bring in my other guest. Ms. Daruwala joins us right now. Like I told, our audience has been working on human rights, specifically with access to justice as her focus for the last 4 decades. Ma'am, thank you for joining us. We had a conversation, before this discussion, where we talked about what reform is and how fundamentally there has to be an intent for reform, which has been missing. So whether the Supreme Court has instructed governments or there are helpful suggestions coming from the Police Foundation, with the absence of that intention to really change something, are we just then beating against a wall that's never going to give way?
Right. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. The absence of intent. It is quite the opposite. There is an intention, in my view now, which is very cynical in my view, I suppose, that there is actually an intention not to change. Because when we talk about reform, we're talking about, first, what kind of reform do you want? What does reform really mean? Does it mean more efficiency without accountability? Or does it mean getting what we have, whether it is there are fewer people, there are many vacancies, there is all sorts of internal shortfalls and frailties within the police. Can we put those right at least? What does an ordinary person feel about reform? Academics like me may talk about different kinds of reform and be able to point that to you. But what does an ordinary person want? In his village, in his town, in his city, he wants to feel safe. She wants to feel safe. She wants to know that if she walks into a police station, which by the way, 24/7 is a place of public business. It is not a sequestered place. So you go to the police station, you should be able to say, officer, this happened to me, and there should be some kind of response. Even if that were done, as Mr. Prakash Singh has hinted at, even if that was done, it would be a sea change. But in fact, what you are getting is something so negative, which now seems to be built into the culture, whether the culture is on the street or in the police station, which makes everybody and anybody hesitate to go to the police station, which means that your first gateway for 1.3 billion people to access justice, access any remedy. I don't want to go to the Supreme Court. I just want to go to the local police station and say, bhai, ye hua. And that is the level at which we have got an obstacle. Now, everybody says yes, nobody's filing FIRs. Each time we go to the police station, we don't want to file an FIR. But where an FIR is to be filed, the courts have repeatedly said, please file it. You are ordered to file it. It is compulsory to file it. And yet there is disobedience. What does that mean? That means that the highest in the land cannot get the lowest, in a way, in some small police station, in some small town or village, to do what the law is saying. That is surely the first reform that we need. There are actionable measures that you can put into place without, as Mr. Prakash said, and I will also definitely confirm and affirm what he says, is internally there is so much you can do without money, without waiting for manpower changes, etc. Now, you can make model police stations. That model police station made in Rajasthan was done as an experiment along with MIT. There were a lot of police officers on this side of the pond, on that side of the pond. There was an academic institution, and they managed 2, 3, 5, 10 model police stations. What is the difficulty in setting those up? That is modeling about the infrastructure, about having a place to sit, about having a toshakhana that is very good, etc. But it is the people in the most shabby police station that can make a difference. Where you have a first-class SHO or a person of the public that the public trusts, you have demonstrations against that person being changed out of that area because he's done a fine job. What does a fine job mean? It means that people feel that there is equity, equality, lack of bias in that person, and a sympathetic ear. A sympathetic ear to the police toward the public must always be a ear that is qualified by the law. The police may be public friendly today to one part of the public and not to another. There is a huge amount of selectivity in how the police function. That also has to go. People have to see that the police will act even-handedly and not disproportionately. And when they are wrong, that they will admit it, and the management, their seniors, will look not to have these people who are criminal in their company. Now, does that happen? Why does that not happen? Doesn't happen because you are vested in the system. When you say that there is pressure from above, of course there is pressure from above. We know that. Every young lad joining the police knows that there is going to be pressure from there. But officers are very privileged people. They get a wonderful training. They have good conditions within which they work. They wear the uniform of the country. The uniform of the country is your obligation and your flag to be upholding of the law, upholding of the constitution. So when you bring forth arguments of pressure, is there no pressure that you feel is enough to displace that pressure? Do the courts not count? Does the constitution not count? Do the welfare of the people not count? You are
Well,
making a
let me
choice.
ask this question. Yes, let me just ask this question right now. It's coming from one of our viewers. Anand Rao says, why hasn't the Supreme Court found the state governments in contempt for not implementing the order for, of 2006? Mr. Singh, do you want to answer that question?
Petitions. Now, 4 of them have become in practice because of the passage of time, and the courts never took cognizance of it. It was listed, of course, several times, but the contempt petition was never taken up. None of the 4. And the 5th one was filed in 2019. That is also pending. It has yet to be heard even once. Somehow I feel that this Supreme Court has been chary about issuing any contempt notice. I do not know. They must be having very strong reasons for that. But I personally, as a petitioner, I always felt disappointed that even when there were blatant cases of contempt. To give the example of UP, for example, I filed a contempt petition against my own state of UP because over a period of about a year or so, they appointed DGPs for 1 month, and one DGP for 1 month, another for 3 months, another for 5 months, another for 4 months. Like that, they kept on appointing. I said this goes against the Supreme Court directions. Either if you appoint a man, either you keep him for 2 years or you don't appoint him at all. Select somebody who has a respectable tenure left and then give him a 2-year tenure. But appointing a man as DGP for one month and 2 months and 3 months, that was a joke on the system. This petition was filed before the Supreme Court, but the Honorable Judge, his remark was, no, let us ask UP what is the reason. And then I do not know. Nothing, we didn't hear after that. So likewise, even when there were very plausible and forceful matters which should have led to issuance of contempt notices, it didn't happen. I can't comment on the working of the Supreme Court. They are very learned judges, and as I said, they must be having very strong reasons for not issuing contempt notices.
Ask you this now. If we'll take a look at the examples, live examples we've seen over the last 1 year, and the example that I want to take, because you were talking about Uttar Pradesh, and because Ms. Daruwala and I were talking about human rights some time ago, was the case of Vikas Dubey, the alleged gangster from Uttar Pradesh, who spearheaded a sort of attack against the police in which 7 police officers serving policemen were killed. And then he was apprehended in a different state. And then he was killed in an encounter. Now, a lot of people turned around at that point and said, why do you want to support a known criminal? Isn't it better that he be dead? In fact, there were some members of his family who also agreed. But at the same time, that entire case sort of displays that underbelly of the police, because how was he allowed to function for so long if he was a gangster? Who was helping him out? And was that encounter actually brought about in order to keep him silent, because dead men tell no tales? This is an example of the lack of police reform. This is an example of the influence of government in police, or the influence of powerful politicians in police. Does this actually, in a real world way, show us as citizens the price we are paying for not pushing this forward? Ms. Daruwala, I'll start with you. Is this an example of when the people in power who should be removing the evil actually become the evil?
Well, you've said it really. When people talk about support for Dubey, if you say what was done was wrong, was illegal, there's so many illegalities in that whole process. There's so much conspiracy and manipulation in what took place. It is there for everybody to see, in the same way that the Hyderabad killing of those 4 people who were allegedly rapists is. But I want to say that this is not support for the gangster. This is support for what we believe to be the rule of law, what we believe to be process. The police are not expected to decide who is guilty and kill them. That's why we have a court. That's why we have a process. If he was so guilty, if that rape case in Hyderabad was so open and shut, it would have been proven in 2 minutes in the courts, or in 2 years, or in 5 years, but it would have been proven. Now, kindly think of it, Faye. Supposing for a minute, those 4 in Hyderabad were not actually the rapists. 4 dead people are innocent, or innocent dead people are there. 4 murderers are there. And there are 4 or 5 actually gang rapers somewhere out there willing to do it again. So what have we achieved? So saying to support something to get through due process is somehow some idiot human rights woman talking about it is absolutely wrong. We are trying to support the law. We are trying to support the processes of the law, which we know to have been proven as effective if they are allowed to be effective.
And so what needs to be done, ma'am?
I think we were talking, Justice Loku's lecture I just heard. I've often heard Mr. Prakash Singh talking. And I think we all want the same thing, but the accent is slightly different. I feel that you have to have accountability today. You have to have lack of bias today. You have to have no selective policing today. For instance, if you look at all the debate and discussion around the JNU matter. Now, you may say that there were plenty of people at the JNU who required to be curtailed and curbed. I don't know. Let it go to the courts. Let it go to court in timely manner. Let it not be manipulated, and we will see. On the other hand, how many FIRs have we seen lodged against the police who we saw on TV cameras breaking, excess use of force, hurting, harming, chasing after people? What about that young boy who died, who was being beaten and pummeled in front of us? We're talking about police reform. We're not talking about public reform. Public reform will come when we see examples of policemen being punished for what they do wrong. Accountability was supposed to be there within the possibility of accountability was also taken care of in the Supreme Court when they said that there should be those police complaints authorities. And hardly any police complaints authorities have been set up, and watching them over these years since the time from 2006 onward to now, I don't feel they're any use at all. Our guardian agencies, do you know, Faye, that there are 170 guardian agencies in this country that are either thematic, looking after women's rights, Dalit rights, minority rights, children's rights, and then there are the human rights commissions in each state, and there is the National Human Rights Commission. They are not strong institutions. If you're talking about obedience to the law, when the National Human Rights Commission says you should do X or Y, why is there so much resistance to doing it? This is within the hands of the police. Why are the police more content to have a dangerous, violent person in their midst rather than make the person accountable to the National Human Rights Commission? This is within the culture of the senior police officers, within their management capability.
If I may intervene at this stage.
Yes, go ahead.
D'Souza, you raised the question of about Vikas Dubey you talked, and Maya also commented on that. You see, the matter is very complex, it is not as simple as it is being made out. There is a thing called, I said long back, there was a Vora committee which was set up, and it published a report on what was called the nexus between criminals, politicians, policemen, bureaucrats. And I remember the DIB's report, the Director IB's report in that context was that here, I mean, this nexus is amounting to a system which is running parallel and which is reducing, the exact words were reducing the state to irrelevance. This nexus is becoming so powerful. Now, at that time, some suggestions were made about how this nexus is to be broken, but none of the state governments are interested in breaking the nexus. And why are they not interested in breaking the nexus? The root cause of the problem is, I mean, if you study the composition of the parliament, that will explain. I mean, that will explain why nobody is interested in tackling these problems. You see, in the members of parliament, in 2004, the number of members of parliament who had a shady background was 14%. In 2009, the figure jumped to 30%. In 2014, the figure went up to 34%. And at 2019 election, it went further up to 43%. Now, that is the number of persons who have some case or the other registered against him, and they are sitting as honorable members of parliament. You expect them to break the nexus? They are part of the nexus themselves. The nexus is not broken, and ultimately, police gets all the flock. Now, you don't treat the root, you don't tackle the root of the problem, and you blame the instruments, you find fault with police, and you find fault with other enforcement agencies. Now, in the case of Vikas Dubey, I don't want to take any names, but I was told by people who are in the know of things that senior officers of the government, of what shade I would not like to specify, senior officers of the government extended patronage to Vikas Dubey. Now, when senior officers are extending patronage, what do you expect the local SHO or local SSP to do? So this is the problem. I'll give you another instance. There's a mafia don called Mukhtar Ansari. Long back, a photograph of his appeared in the press of Mukhtar Ansari moving in the corridors of the secretariat at a time when he should have been inside the jail. Now, this is a nexus. This is the problem. You can blame the police for it, but the police can't give orders to the chief minister or can't give to the people who are in charge of security in the assembly and the secretariat. The problem is much deeper, and this nexus is not being broken, and electoral reforms are not being introduced. We are getting all kinds of people in the parliament who are not interested in police reforms, who are not interested in criminal justice reforms, because if you introduce reforms, they lose their jobs. They lose all the clout they have in the constituency. So the problem is really very deep, and I mean, at our level, we can try to improve the environment in the police station. We can try to be polite with the complainant. But what do you do when a chief minister, and I'm quoting fact, a chief minister gave a specific order that crime figure should be brought down by 70%. And then not everybody could achieve 70%, but 20%, 30%, they all did. And then to make an example of it, the chief minister suspended 8 to 10 IPS officers. 8 to 10 IPS officers were suspended because they had not reduced crime figures by 70% and they had reduced only by 30 or 40%. Now, this is the problem. I mean, the buck, yes, every time it stops at the police, but people do not understand, do not go to the root of the problem.
Does that result in working of cases because the chief minister has told me to bring it down by 70%, I just stop registering cases because then the number comes down?
Exactly. At that time, when this order was given about 70% of reduction, I wrote a detailed complaint to the National Human Rights Commission. It was, I think, 7 or 8 pages of report with about 15, 20 pages of annexures. And you know what the NHRC did? NHRC was hardly an active body those days. They sent a copy of that to the Chief Secretary of the State for necessary action. And that was the end of the matter. I said, human rights of the entire population of Uttar Pradesh is being violated every day in every police station because every police station is working under the instruction of the chief minister to reduce crime figures. There is no magic wand with the police to reduce the crime figure. So police gets flack for so many things. But if you go to the root of the problem, you'll find that there are such vicious forces at work. which don't let you function. So the problem is really, the problem is very serious, and it is across the board. We need criminal justice reforms, we need electoral reforms, and we need police reforms. Unless all this is tackled simultaneously, we can keep on blaming the police, we can keep on holding such dialogues and discussions, but we'll be back to square one every time.
Mr. Singh, does the police, largely serving police, feel that the citizens are not paying enough attention to what is going on, so they don't have the support of the citizens to do what is right?
See, unfortunately, we glorify the Indian people that the electorate are very wise, very sensible, and they will choose the right government. But if you go to the constituency, they will select a mafia don because he will do their job. They will elect a person who is of their caste because then he will do his job. There is a research book published on the subject that the candidates are given tickets on the basis of their winnability. And criminals, persons with criminal background have much greater winnability than a person with a clean image. This has come out in researches. So at the grassroots level also, things have become so rotten that you don't know where to start and how to start and where to reform and where to how to carry it forward. But of course, everyone has to contribute his share. Everyone has to make his humble effort, whatever little he can do. And it is in this spirit that I am campaigning for police reforms. Because you see, police. What I feel about the police is that here is a force which is spread across the country. Across the country, whether you talk of Mizoram or whether you talk of Gujarat or Kashmir or any other part of the country, but you have a police post or outpost. And the strength of the Indian police, I think it is more than 2.5 million today. And another million is the Central Armed Police Forces. Now, if these 2.5 million people start working sincerely, genuinely, with a feeling of sympathy, compassion, empathy for the common man, imagine what a transformation it would be. They will see change in the life of the common man. But this transformation is like churning of ocean to produce Amrit. It is proving to be such a tremendous exercise. I'm up against the bureaucracy is opposed to it. The politicians are opposed to it, and a section of police officers are also not enthusiastic about it. This is the problem because these police officers, they have climbed up the ladder in the old system by hobnobbing with politicians. They don't want any change. They say, प्रकाश भाई क्या कर रहे हो तुम? जो ठीक है, वो जो चल रहा है ठीक तो चल रहा है. ठीक कैसे चल रहा है भाई? ठीक नहीं चल रहा है. It needs to change, and the only support I'm getting is from the junior officers and the middle level officers. So it's a very complex situation. It's very complicated, and the nexus problem is such which has to be broken. It has to be smashed.
Well, first of all, Mr. Singh, I want to thank you for the work that you are doing and the Indian Police Foundation is doing by constantly keeping an eye on the movement in this area and constantly drawing public attention to the fact that police reforms need to be brought through immediately. Ms. Daruwala, I want to again draw from current examples because it helps our audience sort of link what we're talking about theoretically with what is actually happening on the ground. You did mention the Delhi police, and I want to just take you through the last couple of things that we've seen in short-term public memory the police do. Police like smashing CCTV cameras during the East Delhi riots. Police, walking into Jamia and really raining blows on the students there in the most brutal fashion. Police lathi charging farmers who are protesting when on instructions of their higher ups. At the same time, right now, we've seen central agencies of the ED, the CBI, the NCB go after 56 grams of, weed, and the whole country is now focused on what's happening with Bollywood, as opposed to the real issues that are playing out in our country. Again, are these examples of police that have now become just henchmen to politicians? Is it getting worse? In the last 40 years you've been tracking police, have we gone from bad to worse, or was it always this bad?
I honestly don't know whether it was always this bad, but this bad has become very public now. It is there for everybody to see every day on the television or on social media, even though in many ways the media, the newspapers, etc., not only have become polarized, but they have also become untruthful. So it's really hard to winnow the chaff from the wheat. So I don't think that the question really is it bad to worse? It is bad today, and it is bad to the detriment of the public, detriment to the rule of law, detriment to democracy, and a true impediment to progress and to development. For instance, just to give, Mr. Prakash Singh mentioned that 9%, I think it was either Mr. Lokura or Mr. Prakash Singh who mentioned that somebody's done a study and said that, violence, the presence of violence is creating almost a 9% deficit in the GDP. Just think about it. Do women feel safe in India to walk about, to go to work, to be safe in their homes? Now, we're talking about 50% of the population. Do they feel that they can walk into, not walk into necessarily a police station, but just go up to a policeman and say, this is happening with me right now, do something about it. Can you help me? Can you walk me home? Would you mind taking me in your car to the next place if I'm stranded? Would you mind if I sat here in the police station for 4 or 5 hours because it's raining outside and I need your help to get home? It's just unthinkable. And it is considered to be okay that it is unthinkable. But it is a primary function of the police to protect the public, and among the public are 50% women. If you take it to children, then we've got 2/3 of the population that we should be thinking about. Mr. Prakash Singh talked about the nexus and the larger complexity of the problem. Of course, it is true. Of course, he is absolutely right. Police reform is linked to criminal justice reform. It is linked to political reform, electoral reform, to the fact that all the institutions of the state are weak and captured also by whoever is in power at that moment. And this is the environment within which we are trying, he and I and others, to get enough attention onto this notion of police reform. Part of this nexus that Mr. Prakash Singh was talking about includes the police itself, includes the lower level police who are in the locality, their relationships with the lower level criminality, their relation, which we have seen with Mr. Dubey, and also among the leadership. And because the leadership is privileged, they must take more responsibility for this continuing state of affairs. It seems to me a dichotomy which the police themselves have to think about, perhaps when they are sitting alone together and don't have people like me watching over their shoulders, to think about how do you say that you have a uniform, that you have authority and power and discretion and the safety of the public in your locality in your hands, given to you as a duty, and yet you put yourself in the position of defending yourself by saying, I am victimized. How can you be both things? And your victimization is there because also there is the collegiality, the brotherhood, the coming together of this force is cohesive sometimes when they are protecting someone, but not when they are speaking about the principle that should inform police.
That's actually very well said. We have another question for Mr. Singh, and this comes from Vishal K. This is a very pertinent question to ask in today's time, Mr. Singh. The question is media pressure on, he's put it in inverted commas, public issues, taking police reforms backwards or forwards? Does it make things worse or does it make things better?
Media pressure is affecting police working, and quite often, I would say, I mean, why talk of only police? I mean, I would say that media pressure is affecting even the judiciary, and media has become so powerful. This is the only group the politicians are afraid of. Otherwise, politicians are the lords of the of the country, but they are always apprehensive about what image the media would project of them. So media pressure affects the police functioning definitely. Uh, the problem is how to ward off this pressure, how to avoid this pressure. You see, if you are a strict professional, and if you sort of uh, I mean, if you are determined to stick to the letter of the law, and you are professional about your work, then it doesn't affect you. But if you are all the time thinking of your image, and you see the problem, I mean, I'm told, some people tell me that some officers are so conscious of media reporting that they cultivate the media people, and they want that some good thing or the other should be published about them every second day or third day. Now, once you get into that kind of weakness, then the media is going to exploit you, and the media is going to put pressure on you to do wrong things also. So, I mean, at least my attitude towards the media was that, I mean, I would never shun the media, but I would never cultivate them either. If you come to me, yes, I will treat you courteously. I'll tell you what you want to know, and that's it. And that's the end of the matter. But these days, people want to cultivate the media, be friendly with them, so that, I mean, good reports are published and they are publicized, and then is at the state headquarters, a good image is projected. I think one should not bother about these things. Your work will always speak for yourself. If your work is good and transparent, and if you have won the confidence of the people, that thing will reach the chief minister and the highest in the land in any case. But people want to project their image irrespective of what they are doing. That creates problems, and these people are very susceptible to media pressures.
Very well said. And taking this back to Ms. Daruwala, in our chat window, there are opinions popping up saying, we are blessed to live in Mumbai, we have better cops. Somebody else says, yes, Mumbai police is far more friendly. And here's the truth, right? It's also because places like Mumbai or Delhi or Bangalore are power centers. So the citizens of these cities have a certain amount of power, a certain amount of access. But the further into rural India we go, the further into the the Adivasi territory, for example, the really impoverished people, that's when the power difference, imbalance between the police and the ordinary citizen really changes, right? Because when we're talking about police reform, it's about treating all citizens same, irrespective of caste, irrespective of religion, irrespective of how poor or rich that person is. When someone walks into a police station needing help, the help should be uniformly available to everybody. How far away are we from making that possible?
Even the infrastructure, there is a report by several of us working together under the aegis of the Tata Trust called the India Justice Report, which takes a look at all of the infrastructure, the budgets, the difference between rural and urban in terms of policing, and also in terms of judiciary and the other subsystems of the justice system. But in that, when we were looking at the infrastructure available, we found that the urban areas are much better served than rural areas. Rural police stations are further apart, they serve larger populations, and accessibility is a real problem. So it would seem to me that uh, large swathes of rural India find themselves not served by policing as I would look at it, as a service which provides safety and security and ensures that the community is harmonious, and that the bad elements in the community and the most vulnerable are protected, but rather it experiences policing only when there is a problem, and then it comes down very, very hard on people who are unable then to access protective mechanisms like lawyers and etc. So it becomes the power equation is so skewed that I am not sure that it is policing as I would like to see it in rural areas. Uh,
Uh,
uh, Faye, can I just add one thing that I wanted to mention?
Please.
See, there is a big issue of institutional bias within the police. And Mr. Prakash Singh will back me up when there are so many studies, there are so many instances which we bring, if we were to bring together, we would see that there are institutional biases. Can the poor register a complaint as easily as I can? Can a woman, as I pointed out, walk into a police station and feel that she will be served as she should be? Is policing selective in relation to minorities? This case of institutional bias, I think, can be addressed solely by the police. It doesn't require politicians, criminals, nexus, anything. It just requires the police to study it, recognize it, and sort it.
if I may say.
Please.
Yes, I agree with what Maja Daruwala said about the institutional bias. It is there, and it is borne out by the status of policing in India report 2019 also. About the inaccessibility, I just want to add some information which would be of interest to you. In Chhattisgarh, there is an area called Abujmar, 4,000 square kilometers of area inhabited by inhabited by tribals. That area has no police station, no tehsil, no revenue presence, no administrative presence of any kind whatsoever. 4,000 square kilometers. And if somebody falls ill, what they do, they put him on a charpai. Four people just carry that charpai. They move for one day, night halt somewhere. Next day, they will reach some hospital, and by that time, the man may be dead or maybe half dead. So that is the kind of, the point of inaccessibility. I thought I'll give you one extreme example.
Yes. And so as we come to the end of this conversation, and we've almost run out of time, unfortunately, it feels helpless. A lot of people are writing to us saying this feels like a helpless situation. It feels like there's nothing that we can do, that citizens are perhaps locked out of the system here. The police are feeling helpless as well. I want just one takeaway from the both of you on what citizens who are watching right now can do. Because it's not right for a citizen to feel helpless in a democracy. The citizen is actually the most powerful person in a democracy if we use that power wisely. What should citizens do? Mr. Singh first.
You see, anybody should not feel helpless. If I were feeling helpless, I would have abandoned the police reforms campaign tomorrow. I'm still hopeful. Number one, I'm hopeful. Number two, I believe that everyone should make his effort. Whether he is able to see the result of his efforts in the immediate future or not, but he must make an effort. I'm very hopeful about the future, and I'm sure reforms will happen one day. It may happen 2 years later, it may happen 10 years later, but they have to happen. They have to happen, and India will change, and we'll have a professional police force, a more people friendly police force. That will happen. About changes in other spheres, also I'm sure things will change, things will improve. I'm quite optimistic about the future, and that's why I'm contributing whatever little I can in that direction. And as for what the citizen should do, raise your voice. Raise your voice when you see anything wrong in any area. Raise your voice in a dignified parliamentary manner. I'm not. Please take care not to give any incitement to violence or indulge in acts of violence, but you raise your voice in a peaceful, democratic manner wherever you are. And as far as police reforms are concerned, at the time of elections, you ask your candidate, are you going to support police reforms or not? If not, if it is not in your manifesto, then we are not going to vote for you. Make it
Yes.
an election issue.
Yes, make it an election issue. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to thank both of our panelists for being so patient and answering those questions. Raise your voice in a democratic, peace-loving, and parliamentary fashion. Parliamentary theoretically, not parliamentary what we're actually seeing happen in Parliament, but what the actual word means, which means politely and with respect, but firmly and with research. Raise your voice and demand better from the police, from the government, from those who run our cities, and as citizens, from the media. Demand better. Thank you for watching. As we continue to talk about police reforms that we've done for the last few weeks, we're going to continue to bring it into perspective why this affects every one of our lives. Because among all of the kinds of governance, whether it is those who sit in parliament or those who sit in state assembly, it's actually the policeman that we come in contact with most of all, which is why this is what we should be taking most personally. And this is the one we should be focusing on the most. What is our police like, and what are we doing as citizens to improve it? Thank you for watching.